okay?
Dancing beat. Hi everyone, I'm your best friend, back in town again.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back to my new Commander Players Guide on just how to play the game. This isn't specifically just for Commander players, but my channel is well known for being a Commander channel. This video is going to be about the game in general, and not just about Commander, and it's going to deal with the cards that you play, the intended outcomes, and the actual outcomes of these cards. The word that I like to use is precision. I use this word quite often. It's not any type of magic lingo that's been established over the past years or anything like that, but instead it's a word that I like to use because I feel that it really helps me understand the cards that I play with. Now, precision means to be exact. It means to be spot on with what you're trying to do. So relative to the cards that we play, if you are playing something like a Swords to Plowshares, you know exactly what's going to happen. You play that spell, you're intending to get rid of a creature, you're intending to exile it, and unless that spell gets countered or exiled on the stack, it's going to resolve and you're going to exile a creature. Now, before I get into any other cards, let's just go over this real quick. It's a little bit of math. What is the square root of 9? You would say 3, right? But it's also -3, because -3 times -3 is also 9. So you also have a negative answer to that question. I think it's important to always think of your cards in the same way. There's also a negative possible outcome to every single card that you play. Spells are primarily what we're going to focus on here when it comes to interacting. How these spells resolve, are they successful, do they fail? And one of the things that a lot of new players to this game really fail to understand, how your decks can be so good with cards that are so cheap. This isn't always the case. Sometimes decks are going to beat you out because they're just filled with a ton of expensive cards, but you can also make a very competitive deck using cheap options, so long as those options do what you intend them to do, more often than not. That's the important part here. Every single spell in this game has the potential to be stopped. Even split-second spells, I know you might be thinking, hey, you can't really stop it, you can't counter it. What is the possible way of dealing with that? Well, there are cards such as Possibility Storm that interact with the card upon the cast, exiling it, therefore it does not resolve, therefore split-second spells are capable of being stopped, not in the typical sense of countering them, but instead replacing it with something completely different. So you have to take all of these effects, all of these spells that can counter, into consideration whenever you cast a spell. I'm not just casting a Swords to Plowshares, I'm casting something that has the potential to be countered. And another thing that should be considered is how much mana you are spending to play these spells. This is another thing that can impact the precision of your spell. If you are spending 8 mana to board wipe, versus only spending 4 mana to board wipe, you run the risk of wasting 4 more mana for the same exact effect. Might do something a little bit different, but for the most part you intend of clearing out all the creatures or all artifacts or enchantments. The more mana that you have to spend to do that means that you have more at stake and you have more to potentially lose if someone were to counter it, or if it were to be exiled on the stack, and overall preventing that card from resolving. So it's not just about the card and the effect itself, but rather what you are putting into it and getting out of it. This is very important for precision. This is why I love cards like Swords to Plowshares, because not only do they do one thing very well, but they're very cheap. Increasing the precision is important because it's also about efficiency. Now, every single color has their precise spells and their imprecise spells. However, one color tends to have more of these imprecise, these random spells than any other color, and that is red. Red does this quite often, and that is actually also an upside. It's not always a negative having a very random spell with random outcomes, because a lot of decks are built to have that flavor, and especially when you consider we just had a set that is all about imprecision, it's all about the random events occurring. I think it's very fun, and it's also an upside whenever you want to build a deck. You can make a consistent theme around randomness, taking advantage of cards like Possibility Storm, as well as cards like Fiery Gambit, which give you incredible rewards if you are successfully able to win the coin flip 3 straight times, and you get a ton of rewards there. However, that is the intended outcome, that is the expected outcome. It's not always the guaranteed outcome, and more often than not, it's not the outcome. And even something like Gamble, something that is only 1 red mana to cast also puts you at risk of losing the card that you searched up, or even other cards in your hand that you do not wish to discard at random. Discarding at random isn't very precise. Now, this is not in any way meant to dissuade you from playing red in Commander. This is only my way of telling you that if you do choose to go with red, understand that you must be comfortable with these aspects to the color. White doesn't have a lot of these random cards. Blue doesn't have a lot of these random cards. It has some randomness, but not always. Black doesn't have a lot of randomness, and green doesn't have a lot of randomness. Red is pretty random. It has its more precise spells. It has cards like Vandal Blast, which are going to do what you want them to do. Word of Seizing, again, split second, very precise. A lot of cards in red are not random, and they actually supplement a more precise deck that is filled with cards that do what they're supposed to do with very little diversion. Now, when it comes to just playstyles and the decks that you build, it's very important to understand control decks and combo decks are primarily the decks that you want to have this precision. Now, aggro decks, they can either be precise or imprecise. It is more or less just making use of your land drops. What are you going to do turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, and so on, rather than just getting exactly what you want. There's more risk involved. You are willing to give up creatures as long as you're capable of keeping the pressure on your opponent. So aggro can go either way, but for the most part, control decks are meant to be precise. I mean, it's in the name, it's control. Control is meant to dictate what is happening at the table, and the only way you can do that successfully is understanding the cards that you use and their outcomes. And the only way you can do that is with good precision. Combo decks, very similar thing. A lot of combo decks are also control decks in a sub-theme, and a lot of control decks are also combo decks in a sub-theme that way too. It's not just pure control or pure combo, but there's also the precision with combo in tutoring up your combo pieces with something like a Demonic Tutor. Very precise, you know exactly what you want to get, and you're going to get it. Very precise, you know exactly what you're going to tutor up, and it's likely going to be the combo piece that you win the game with. You know exactly what you want. There's no randomness here. There's no, well, maybe I could win with this. If I get lucky, if my opponent does this, I might be able to then respond, see what happens 2 turns later. That's not always the case. With a lot of combo decks, you know what you're getting into. Now, this is in no way meant to dissuade you from playing these awesome chaotic decks, because what they do very well is also disruption. That is another thing about chaos. That's another thing about imprecision, is that it can also work to your advantage, especially with cards such as Possibility Storm that affect what your opponents do as well as yourself, introducing that randomness factor to what your opponents are trying to do. If your opponent wants to cast a Demonic Tutor, it's going to turn into another sorcery. It's going to spread the love around to your opponents, and I love this aspect of red that people seem to overlook quite often. But anyway, guys, hope this was a big help to you if you are finding difficulties in understanding colors. I might go into more depth about that in yet another video, but hopefully what you got out of this video was that there are multiple different outcomes for each spell that you cast. Even ones that you think are uncounterable, there are still interactions that are stopping that card from resolving in the way that you intend them to. When you cast something as simple as a Swords to Plowshares, it's not just going to be Swords to Plowshares, you also have the potential of casting a countered Swords to Plowshares. You also have the potential of casting a Swords to Plowshares that turns into another instant. So just keep that in mind. It's just as much about choosing the cards to put into your deck as it is about playing the cards. Let me know what you thought about it in the comment section below. Anyway, you guys have a wonderful day. Void here signing off.